How are you doing today? My name's Chris Cook, an English instructor with the Dual Enrollment Program, and today we're going to be talking about integrating sources. So we've got some goals for today. One thing I think that's really important, doesn't matter if you're an English major or psychology major, history, or anything like that, is that you take the research that you're using to compose your essays and that you integrate it into your essays correctly. So I'm going to show you a few different techniques to do that because we want you to, at the very least, challenge yourselves as a writer. And when you grow as a writer, you'll find that this technique just sort of becomes second nature. So that's really important that we practice that. And I'm going to show you lots of examples and just sort of tell you the best approach, in my opinion, to composing an essay using research and sources. So let's get started. First things first, as you can see, this slide right here has a pretty boring title. So the first thing someone sees when they see your essay is the title. So with that being said, integrating sources presentation, I get a lot of essays like that. It's like, oh, here's my essay about whatever. But you can always sort of spruce it up a little bit. So for example, we have this, what I call multi-tier title, taking your paper to the next level of awesomeness, integrating quotes. So as you can see there, you've got a little section of your title with some pizzazz, and then the next section actually tells you what is going on in the essay. So I think that's one good approach that you can use for your titles if you're ever struggling with constructing a title. So when you're composing an essay, it's always important to remember to show off your voice, right? This is your writing. Your writing is trying to convey your opinions. But it's such a short amount of time to do so. So 3 to 5 pages, let's be honest here, you have to pick the best subject for you that's gonna really show off your passion and display your passion for the subject. And you want to use all your best writing, your best tricks, and your best talent in there. And so when you're looking at something like 3 to 5 pages, you don't have much time to show off the best research that you found and to pick a topic that really shows that you know what you're talking about. So I'm going to be looking at your essays sort of like, an American Idol judge, oh, I didn't really think that song was right for you, right? That you always hear them say that. Well, the same thing applies for you. I can tell if you just sort of force the topic. It's best to choose topic and research that you find is really working for you and that you care about, right? So moving on, I always like to show this slide because we call it an essay salad, right? So you want all of your writing, your opinions, and your awesome ideas to sort of construct the essay and be the substance, right? The lettuce, the tomatoes, the croutons, all the stuff that you can crunch into. That's your opinion. That's your arguments. And then you drizzle a little bit of olive oil or a little bit of your salad dressing over that particular salad. That is actually your research, right? You're just adding it for flavor, and you're adding it for just a little bit of spice. We don't want to create a soup out of it where you just drop in lots of research and block quotes and you have none of your opinion, and then it just looks like nothing but salad dressing and you've got one little piece of lettuce floating in there shouting for help and drowning in this huge ocean of salad dressing. So it's important that most of the substance of your essay be the salad, right? The lettuce, the tomatoes, and it's all your opinion, your arguments, and then you just give us a little bit of research to spruce it up and to support it. You know how to do this already. You know how to use research because you know what reporters do, right? So let's say, for example, you watch the Saints game this weekend. You go back and watch the sports reel, the highlight reel on Monday during, WWL Sportscast. And they're not going to give you the whole 3 hours of the Saints game all over again. They're just going to show you the highlights. They're just going to show you the highlight reel with, Drew Brees throwing a touchdown pass, or the defense getting that pick six and running it back. So you know how to do this. Find in your research the highlight reel. If there's 7 or 8 pages of research that you find, pick just the touchdowns, the interceptions, the really good stuff, the strongest stuff, to compose your essay. When you're building that essay and you're building your case, you don't need to give me 700 of the same examples. Just use the 2 or 3 best ones, and that's your highlight reel. So be a newscaster, figure it out. You're going to want to use quotes that effectively support your argument, but you also want to use stuff that's clear and concise, right? You don't need lots of heady language. You can just find the stuff that gets really to the point and really supports your opinion. You're also going to want to find stuff that's found in refereed sources. What we mean by that, what's a referee do? They kind of make sure everybody's playing by the rules. So instead of just going to your friend's blog and posting about talking about their post in your paper, find something from a source that is refereed. What we mean by that, academic journals or sources where experts in the field have sort of refereed that material, and they are making sure that you're not, writing about weird stuff, right? Or not writing about important materials. So you're also going to want to find stuff that helps you develop your thesis, whether or not that be from the opposing view or from your view. And you want stuff that matches the tone of your essay, right? Sometimes your tone of your essay, you're going for a specific approach, so you don't want to find anything, let's say, that's too silly if you're going for a serious approach. You're going to want to find stuff that sort of helps you build your argument. So you might find lots of research that is already in agreement with you. You might find 3 or 4 books that are just like, oh, look, this expert 100% agrees with me, or I agree with them. So they're on the same team as you. And that's really important to help you sort of reinforce your arguments and bolster those. You can also take the approach too, and I think this is really important, of sort of intercepting the opposing views arguments, finding holes in those and undermining them. So find research from the opposing view. Make sure that you have some balance and some nuance in your argument. What I mean by balance is, well, you can look at the opposing side, and it's important to find that research and bring that into, so you can show, look, 16% of people believe this, but 54% of people believe what I believe, right? So that's how you're going to compose your essays, and that's what you want to do with your research, is balance that out. You still want to look at what other people are saying. So I'm going to show you a technique today called ICE. What ICE stands for is integrate, cite, and explain. So you'll often hear me say ICE, ICE, baby. Well, that's because I want you to try to remember this. Get this in. Integrate, cite, explain. ICE. And I always like to show this. You might ask yourself, well, why are you showing us this slide, Mr. Cook? Well, if you remember, back in the day, lots of people know Vanilla Ice and his hit Ice Ice Baby. Well, what you might not know is that Queen and David Bowie actually wrote a song called Under Pressure, and it's a much better song in my opinion. And Vanilla Ice decided he was going to use that and rap over that for Ice Ice Baby. But he didn't give credit to Bowie and to Queen. And that caused him a lot of problems because that's plagiarism. And so I like to call him the plagiarist of the century, because there's even a video of him saying, look, mine goes dun 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 dun, theirs goes dun 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 dun. It's the same song. It's the same song. And so if you are not giving credit where credit is due, you're being the same way as him when you're saying, oh, look, this is my opinion. All you have to do is cite your sources and introduce them correctly, and then you don't have to worry about it. It's not plagiarism, because you're actually saying, look, I'm giving credit where credit is due. This is not my opinion. This is the research of someone else. Otherwise, I might send you a picture of Vanilla Ice here and say, look, you're being this guy, so don't be that guy. When integrating sources, you want to introduce your speakers the first time you use a source, right? The voice is not coming from the sky. It's not some disembodied spirit that's come to us to talk to us about your research. So you want to let us know who's speaking. Why do we even care? Are they important? What are their credentials? Did they get something published? So you're going to want to immediately, let's say, you find an article about something. This was found in this source. So you're telling us who's speaking and why. So in this example here, in his presentation about integrating sources, Chris Cook, an instructor from Southeastern Louisiana University, insists that students should introduce speakers. So right there, we know who's talking. We know that it's coming from a speech or a presentation. And we know why we're supposed to listen. The credentials are instructor from Southeastern Louisiana University. So that's what I'm going to be looking for in your essay when you first introduce a source, that you let us know why we should even care and why we're listening to that source. Gonna also be looking for signal phrases. So lots of students get stuck in saying so-and-so says, so-and-so says, so-and-so states, so-and-so says, and you use the same signal phrase over and over. But you want to use strong, effective verbs that actually convey what is the author really trying to say about it. Are they really forceful about it? Are they defending a claim? And you can use your Little Brown Handbook for that. There's a whole list of words that you can use that are going to be more effective at telling us what exactly is going on. And with the Little Brown Handbook, I mean, this slide right here shows you a few, but it's not an exhaustive list. None of these words are words you haven't seen before, concedes or maintains or insists, illustrates, explains. You know all these words. So it's not like I'm asking you to use strange vocabulary. These words will really help to elevate your diction and sort of create that academic tone that we're looking for in these essays. And don't forget what Uncle Dumbledore says here. Professor Dumbledore wants you to use a variety of spells. Imagine if you were watching Harry Potter and they all went to Hogwarts just to learn one spell, Wingardium Leviosa, right? It'd make for a really boring, ineffective movie. You want to see variety. So I want to see variety in your language, especially with those signal phrases. Spice it up, energize your writing. Most of the time, the energy comes from verbs. So we want to see those strong, really good signal phrases and verbs in your writing. All right, so one of the quickest ways that you will actually hurt your grade is if you just dump the quotes in. You're just dropping them in and you're not integrating them properly. And I'm going to show you a technique to do it effectively. But this example right here shows you how not to do it. I took this straight from a student essay. You can even see there are some grammatical errors in it. Beowulf also possessed the heroic trait of supernatural strength. And then right here you have just a dumped in quote. Going up against Grendel with no sword and defeating him was expected to be a very difficult task. All right, so we don't really know what sources that's coming from, who's saying that, so you want to do it correctly. Here's another example. However, Sullenberger was not always recognized as a hero. We're talking about Sully from The Miracle on the Hudson, right? And then they just dump in this sentence. You can see right there the source comes from Kolker, but we don't know, is that the full name? What source is this coming from? So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. I know I'm not there physically with you to sort of enforce this, but trust me on this. This is going to help you see what I'm talking about when I say this technique is special and you should be able, we'll get to that. So I'm going to fix that first Beowulf quote. And we're going to see if you can figure out where I'm quoting from. All right, so close your eyes, just listen the first time, and the second time I want you to raise your hand when you think that we're doing a direct quote. All right, eyes closed? Good. So here we go. Beowulf, possessing the heroic trait of supernatural strength, battled Grendel with no sword, even though defeating him was expected to be a very difficult task. All right, keep those eyes closed, because I'm going to do it again. Raise your hand when you think I'm using a direct quote. Beowulf, possessing the heroic trait of supernatural strength, battled Grendel with no sword, even though defeating him was expected to be a very difficult task. All right, you ready? Open your eyes. Is that what you expected to see? What we have here is what I like to call quote weaving, right? So I didn't just use one direct quote. I weaved in and out of the direct quote. And you could do that too. We're gonna practice a lot of this throughout the year in class. But right here, you can see your first example where you can sort of see, you can use pieces and parts of the direct quote and just weave them into your own writing so that you don't have to just dump in these huge long quotes. And remember, direct quotes should never, ever, ever, ever disrupt readability and grammatical cohesion. You could see I read through right there and everything was grammatically cohesive. And you probably couldn't tell at home when I was leaving the quote and coming back into it because it's weaved in nicely. Here's another example. And with this one, we're using some brackets and some ellipses. So keeping this description in mind, Foucault posits, strong signal phrase, that in discourse, power and knowledge are joined together. And then you could see some more quote weaving examples there. So why would we want to use brackets or maybe an ellipsis? For those of you, if we were in class right now, I'd be asking you and calling on you, so you lucked out here. So brackets would be modifying the words there to create different context for the sentence. Perhaps that wasn't the word that was used, but to make it grammatically cohesive, like we talked about, you had to change the word or change, a capital letter to a lowercase letter or something like that to make it fit correctly in your sentence. That's when you'd use a bracket, when you're just changing minor parts just to make it fit better with your sentence, either contextually or grammatically. An ellipsis is when you leave out some information. Probably most of the time it's just unimportant information or something you want to skip over. But remember not to take the reader out of context. So don't leave out a not if he's saying, it is not good to drive in the rain while texting and doing donuts on the interstate. And then you just take out the not, and then you think, oh man, you found some research and a source that says you should do donuts on the interstate while texting and driving in the rain, right? That's not what you want to do. You're actually just leaving out some sort of unimportant information or something that's keeping you from getting to your main point. All right, so let's do something a little fun here. I hope you know who this is. This is Scar from the Disney's The Lion King. One of my favorite cartoons growing up, so hopefully you've seen it too. So, as you know, Scar devised a little plan and hatched a plan to murder his brother. So let's pretend that Scar wrote a book called Scar's Guide to Fratricide. And on page 3 of this book, this is what he says. I simply despise my loathsome brother Mufasa. He is such a spotlight-hogging king. I would be a better king because of my brilliant, calculating mind. All right, so right now, you're writing a paper about this. You're like, cool, Scar's Guide to Fratricide. I'm going to write an essay about that. And that's a cool quote. I'm going to quote Scar right now. So here's one way of doing so without having to dump in that big, long, huge, egotistical rant right there. In his book, Scar's Guide to Fratricide, Scar contends that his calculating mind makes him more qualified to be king than his spotlight-hogging brother Mufasa. And there you can see a little parenthetical citation right there. So let's break this down to its essential components. In his book, Scar's Guide to Fratricide, all right, you've introduced the source. Good job. Scar, now we know who's speaking, contends, there's your signal phrase, that his calculating mind makes him more qualified to be king than his spotlight-hogging brother Mufasa. And you can see right there, we've actually only used a few little pieces and parts from that big long quote from Scar. There's the direct quote right there. And really, you have boiled down 3 whole sentences of what Scar is saying into one of your sentences. And you've managed to use source, or introduce your source and tell us who's talking while using a good signal phrase. And you're doing some of that quote weaving that we're talking about. And you can do this with just a little bit of practice. Here's just one more example. Scar, the villain of Disney's The Lion King, hates his brother because Mufasa is such a spotlight-hogging king. Right? So once again, you've told us who's speaking and why we should listen. And right here I'm using brackets. Remember what we talked about, what we said about brackets? Why, take a second and just look at this. Why would we use brackets right here? Just take a second, look at that first quote that we used from Scar. All right, I'm sure you've figured out by now that it's because Mufasa wasn't actually the word that was used in the book right there. It was actually he, but you're providing context to the sentence by changing the word and using brackets. So that's just one example of why you might want to use brackets, because otherwise your reader might say, well, who's he? Define your pronoun, and now you're doing that. All right, a lot of times you might even see a quote within a quote. So let's say Jafar is studying page 3. He wants to be a better villain, and he wants to quote from Scar. So he would need to use quotes within quotes. You're going to want to stay away from that most of the time and just quote the person who's actually doing the speaking and stuff. But let's say you were using some quotes within quotes. In his book about being a villain, Scar insists Mufasa, his hated brother, distrust him. That's when you see the single quotation marks, right? A lot of times I see some of you using single quotation marks for quotes. No, you're using double, and the only time you're going to use those single quotation marks is if you're using quotes within quotes right there. Alrighty? So let's move on. I'm going to typically ask you not to use too many block quotes. All right, block quotes can really slow down your essay. And if you're using the quote weaving techniques that we're talking about today, you're not really going to have to use these big, long, lengthy block quotes. But if you have to use a block quote, maybe let's say one in your entire essay, remember, if you're talking about poetry, you're going to use it for 3 lines of quotation or more. If it's prose, you'd use it for 4. If it's 4 lines or more, then you can actually use a block quote. But stay away from doing it more than, let's say, just once an essay. I would say really most of the time you don't need to use it at all. So the second part of ICE, cite, right? We're going to talk about citations now. Remember, plagiarism is stealing. Good old Batman here is ever vigilant for looking for that, those outlaw students that plagiarize. You're going to have to use citations even for summarized or paraphrased material. So even if you don't use all the direct quotes that we're talking about in your quote weaving, you still have to use a citation telling us where that information is coming from. All right, so just because you're not using direct quotes doesn't mean that you don't need to cite the source where you found the research. You're going to need a works cited page too for almost everything you do other than, let's say, a memoir, some creative writing, short stories and stuff for this class. So the basics about citing, it's part of your sentence, right? So the parenthetical citation that we talk about with MLA is actually going to go inside of your sentence with it. So right here you could see an example. Likewise, the book contends that practicing citation is the only way to become comfortable with it. Cook 8, pretend like I wrote a book here, but it is a necessary evil to learn MLA. And then you have a parenthetical citation 16. So you could see that with one sentence, we've actually gone over 2 different sections of quotes, right? You took an excerpt from page 8 from my fake book that I didn't write, and then you took another little excerpt, a little snippet from page 16, but you found a way to put it both in one sentence, and that's good. That's fine to quote weave from various parts. What you can see here is that both of those parenthetical citations belong to that sentence, so they're actually within the period right there, period ends a sentence, and you want to actually sort of target which parts are coming from which part of the book. So that little first direct quote, you've got Cook 8 right there, because that came from page 8. Then the next section you have page 16 because you've got a direct quote and then some more stuff that's paraphrased. So you'd put 16 behind that because that's paraphrased a little bit. And then of course you don't need Cook the second time because we already know it's coming from the same source. The only time you need to bring the author's last name back up is when you are changing sources and stuff. All right, so a lot of confusion comes from students when they don't know what type of source is this. You might be looking at an online source, a newspaper that's online. You're like, well, how do I cite a newspaper that's online? So a lot of the time, you're just going to need to dig into a little resource that we've given you called the Little Brown Handbook. That is the right tool for the job, and constructing your works cited entries is going to be much easier if you use the Little Brown Handbook as your main resource, right? They have a little index that'll help you out in finding out, well, which source am I really using and how do I construct my works cited page? So there's really nothing all that complex about using the Little Brown Handbook to construct your works cited page. It's sort of like following a cookbook, right? You're following the recipe and you're just putting in the ingredients. Okay, the author goes first, the title, then the big anthology where it comes from, and then the publication date, right? So you're gonna look at the Little Brown Handbook and just follow the recipes in there. Like I said, there's an index you can actually find. Okay, well, I'm cooking this one today. I'm cooking an online source that has 3 authors. Well, there you go, and you go to that page and you just follow the recipe to a T. And it's actually pretty simple, and they even have placeholders sometimes, because you know when you're cooking, sometimes you run out of, onion powder, or you run out of, Tony Sashers or something like that. So you have to just make do and use a placeholder. That might happen when you're constructing your works cited page as well. So the last part of Ice Ice Baby, ICE, is explain. And what I mean by explain is you're going to explain how all of your research and everything leads back to something. All of your quotes and stuff should lead back to what? Take a second, think about it. What does all of your research and all point back to in your essay? I think you figured it out. Your thesis statement, hopefully you got that. Each quote or each piece of research that you use, you have to ask yourself, how is this reinforcing my thesis statement? What is it doing to enhance my essay and making it easier for my reader to understand my thesis statement? So does it prove or support your thesis statement is sort of the main question you've got to ask before you even use a piece of research or a direct quote. Alrighty? So one of the things that I see happen this thing happens pretty often actually, is a student thinks, explain, right? Okay, so I've integrated my source, I've used a citation. No, I'm just going to explain the quote. And what that he or she might end up doing is just restating the quote, the direct quote that you just used, pretty much verbatim, right? And you're like, oh, you know, this says this, and you're just restating it. Trust that your reader doesn't need you to restate it in your own words. Trust that your reader understands the quote just like you did when you're using it. If you don't understand the quote, then maybe you shouldn't be using it, because maybe you should find a source that you do understand. So trust that your reader will understand the quote the first time. The explain part of the ICE method, the ICE technique, is that you are explaining how it relates back to your thesis statement, or how it reinforces the argument that you're making right then and there, right? So otherwise, your reader won't understand why you even use that piece of research or that snippet, right? So what does this statistic mean? 19% of Louisiana residents do X, Y, and Z. And they'll be like, well, how does that relate back to your thesis statement? And that's your job to explain how this is making your argument for you, the big picture part, right? So, that's all we have for today for integrating sources and the ICE method. I expect that you're going to practice this. Remember, all of writing is a discipline, it's an art, just like playing a sport or just like playing an instrument. You want to practice it and get comfortable with it. It's going to take some time. It's important for me and for my class that you practice this. If you don't try it at all, you will get a worse grade than if you try it and you just mess up a little bit. Finesse takes time, and remember, writing is a process, and I want you to challenge yourself as a writer. That's the most important thing for me, is that you grow as a writer. And with this technique, I think that you can bring this with you even if you're taking nursing classes, history classes, psychology classes, any class that asks you to do research. You can use the techniques that we talked about today. So hope you've had a good time with this lesson, and we'll talk to you later. Have a good one.